The jungle world was silent in a way that made every sound heavy and sharp. The human walked slowly through the thick trees, with his breath steady and his eyes wide. He felt the air press against his skin, like it carried secrets. No bird sang, and no insect hummed, and that silence was the first warning that something unseen was near. He carried no great weapon, only a simple blade and a light pack for food and water. He knew that strength would not save him if the hidden shadow came closer. He knew this world was not kind and was not safe. He had heard the whispers from alien mouths about the one who ruled here, the predator, the nightmare that no hunter dared to follow, the beast that gave no mercy. Leaves shifted above his head, slow and careful, and the man froze with his hand gripping the knife. He felt eyes on him, heavy eyes that studied his every move. He did not run because running meant death. He did not shout because shouting meant weakness. He only breathed slow and steady, waiting for the shape to reveal itself. The trees opened for a moment, and there it stood, tall and broad and covered in hide dark as stone, its claws long like sharpened blades, and its teeth white against the night air. The predator did not leap. It did not strike. It only stared with eyes like burning amber. The gaze cut through the man and weighed his soul. Stories had said no one lived once chosen by the predator. Yet here he stood alive and trembling, but not broken. The beast circled him slowly, each step heavy and sure, its growl low like thunder hidden in the earth. It was close enough for him to feel the warmth of its breath, but still it waited, as if searching for something in the fragile creature before it. The human felt his knees want to bend and his heart pound hard, yet he lifted his chin and stared back. His body spoke what his voice dared not say. I will not run. I will not bow. I will face you. And in that silent exchange the predator paused, as if caught in thought, as if measuring the worth of the strange hairless thing that stood before it without trembling voice or fleeing feet. Time stretched like a rope pulled tight, the jungle around them still in fear. No leaf moved and no wind blew. Only the two figures locked in a circle of silence. The beast lowered its head close until its fangs brushed the air an inch from his chest. The man felt death touch him, but did not flinch. He kept still with eyes sharp as steel. A sound came then, not a roar, not a growl, but something that almost felt like a word shaped by a throat not made for speech. It was harsh and strange, yet clear enough to form a meaning. The name was given to him, Uncle Death. The predator's voice rumbled with that sound before stepping back and lifting its head to the sky. It had marked him not as prey, but as something else. The man could not understand why. His mind raced to make sense, but deep in his chest he felt that this was no mistake. He had been chosen, not for food, not for sport, but for a purpose yet unseen. The predator's eyes burned brighter for a moment before it turned and vanished into the black canopy, silent as shadow, leaving only the echo of that name Uncle Death in the air. The human stood alone again, but not the same as before. Every hair on his skin rose. Every nerve was alive with fire. He had faced the beast that no one survived, and still he breathed. He had been given a name by the darkest hunter of the stars, a name heavy with unknown weight. The silence returned to the jungle, but it was no longer empty. It was full of unseen eyes and hidden meaning. The night itself now whispered that his life was tied to something vast and dangerous. He walked forward with his knife still in hand, each step trembling yet steady. He could not leave. He could not turn back, because once the predator had named him there was no path but forward. Every branch that cracked, every shadow that swayed felt like a test, a question that only courage could answer. The jungle was alive again, but alive with threat. He knew the beast still watched from the dark, unseen but never gone. In his chest fear and awe battled for place. Fear that death still waited in the next breath. Awe that such a being had spared him and had spoken to him. He whispered the name to himself, Uncle Death, and felt it settle heavy on his tongue. It was not a curse and not a blessing. It was a bond he did not ask for but could not refuse. And though he did not yet understand, he knew this was the beginning of something greater than survival. It was the first step into a story that would spread far, beyond this silent jungle. The night after the encounter felt longer than any night the human had ever known. He sat by a small fire that gave little warmth and no safety. Every crack of the flames echoed through the jungle like a cry for death to come. He whispered the name to himself again, Uncle Death. the sound heavy like a chain wrapped around his spirit. He wondered why the beast had spared him and why it had spoken to him. The question burned louder than the fire before him, yet no answer came, only the heavy silence of the world around him. He closed his eyes, but sleep would not take him. His body was tired, but his heart carried the weight of unseen eyes. He felt the beast still near though unseen. He felt the jungle bend to its presence. He felt the very soil breathe with its steps, though no step was heard. He knew this was not mercy. This was something else, and he knew that something was watching and judging him, waiting for his every move. When the first light touched the canopy, he rose from his place and walked deeper into the unknown. Hunger clawed at his belly. Thirst scratched his throat, yet he did not dare to stop for long. He felt that to stop was to fail, to fall short of the unseen test laid before him. So he kept walking, each step slow and careful, each breath heavy with fear and defiance. Hours passed like days, and soon the weight of heat pressed down on him. He found a stream of water dark and narrow, the surface calm yet hiding dangers. He bent down and lifted water in his hands. When he raised his eyes, he saw a shadow on the far bank. The predator stood again, watching in silence. No movement but the wind in its mane, no sound but the stream between them, its amber eyes sharp like blades of fire. It did not leap, it did not roar, it only stared. The man raised his chin and drank, never breaking the gaze. And when he wiped his mouth, the beast turned and walked away, as if his choice had been seen and marked. The man continued onward, and soon the ground grew steep, and the trees closed in. He felt the jungle itself turn against him. Vines like chains, thorns like spears, roots like traps. He slipped and fell more than once, his skin cut and bleeding. Yet every time he rose again, every time he pushed forward, he felt eyes above him, the predator on a branch high in the shadows, watching, waiting, judging, not as prey, but as something being weighed for worth. He knew then that this was no accident, no random chance. He was part of a trial he could not refuse. On the third day the storm came. The sky ripped open with light, and the air cracked with thunder. The rain fell like blades of glass, and the world turned into rivers of mud. The man wrapped his arms around a tree and held on as the storm tried to tear him away. His pack torn open, his food washed into the ground. He had nothing but his knife and his strength. Yet through the storm he saw it again. The predator stood against the wind, unmoving, its eyes fixed on him, not as hunter to prey, but as master to student, as judge to soul. The human held on until the storm passed, and when silence returned, he was still there standing in mud and ruin. The predator gave a sound low and rough, a sound like thunder made into breath, and then vanished once more. Nights bled into days, and the human felt himself change. Hunger burned, but no longer broke him. Pain stung, but no longer stopped him. Fear bit, but no longer ruled him. He became something more than weak flesh in a cruel world. He became steady. He became calm. And the predator knew, for every night it came closer. Every night it sat nearer to the fire, though never crossing into the light, its eyes never leaving him, its breath a heavy reminder that he was still being measured. Word spread beyond the jungle. Travelers from alien tribes spoke of the man who walked the predator's land and still breathed. They whispered of the one called Uncle Death. They said no creature had ever survived more than a night in that place. Yet the human had lived for many, and each day the predator still did not kill. Some said the beast had gone mad. Others said the man was cursed. But a few began to fear that something far greater was happening, that the predator had chosen. The human did not hear their words, but he felt their truth. Every moment in the jungle was a question, every choice an answer. When he lit his fire, the predator watched. When he hunted for food, the predator followed. When he rested, the predator circled. It was always there, never striking, never leaving, like a shadow of death that did not fall but lingered, like a hand that tested the weight of steel before forging it into a blade. One night he heard a sound not from the predator, but from the shadows around. A pack of lesser beasts, with fangs sharp and eyes hungry. They crept toward him with growls low and cruel. He rose with knife in hand, ready to fight, though he knew he could not win. They circled him, teeth glinting in the firelight. Then the trees shook and the predator came. It roared once, and the beasts fled like smoke in wind. It did not strike him. It did not feed on the lesser beasts. It only stared, as if to say, I gave you a test, you stood, you fought, you did not fall. And then it left again, leaving silence thick as stone. The human sank to his knees with breath heavy and chest burning, yet inside he felt no despair. He felt fire. He felt strength. He felt the truth that the predator was not his enemy but his judge, not his killer but his measure. And every day he lived, he proved something not only to himself, but to the beast that ruled the jungle. Time no longer felt the same. He did not count days. He counted moments of judgment. The storm, the hunger, the beasts, the silence. All of them tests. All of them pieces of a puzzle only the predator knew. Yet he endured, and with each trial the predator grew nearer. Its presence heavier, but less cruel. Its eyes fierce, but less hostile. The bond of respect was forming, though no word was spoken, though no gesture was shared. The human and the predator were no longer hunter and hunted. They were something else, two lives bound by trial and fire. When the moon rose full above the canopy and cast silver across the ground, the predator stepped from the shadows and did not leave. It came close enough for him to see the scars across its hide, the marks of countless battles, the history written on its flesh. It lowered its head close to him again, the firelight burning in its eyes, and once more it gave that sound, Uncle Death, not as insult, not as curse, but as a title, a recognition, a truth. The human had been judged and found worthy. Though the purpose still lay hidden in the dark ahead, he knew then that this was only the beginning, that the true reason for the predator's judgment was yet to come. He felt it in his bones. He felt it in the silence of the jungle and in the weight of the name, Uncle Death, a name not given by chance, but by choice, a name that would carry him forward into trials far greater than hunger and storm, a name that bound him not only to the predator, but to the fate of its kind. And though he did not yet see the road, he walked into the night with eyes sharp and heart steady, ready for whatever test would come next, ready to prove again and again why the predator had spared him, why the predator had judged him, why the predator had named him Uncle Death. The jungle no longer felt like a stranger to the human. Every branch, every shadow, every whisper of wind carried meaning. He walked with careful steps, yet no longer in fear. He had seen death in the amber eyes of the predator, and he had not broken. Now he felt a strange weight like unseen chains, not of doom but of duty, as if every breath was part of a larger judgment still shaping itself around him. The predator appeared often now, not always near but never far, sometimes in the branches above, sometimes across the river, sometimes just behind him where he could feel its breath, but not turn to see. It did not strike, and it did not flee. It simply followed. And with each day the human understood that this was no longer about survival alone. It was about something deeper, something like respect forming between two beings from worlds apart. He hunted with a small blade, weak against the beasts of the jungle, yet sharp enough for fish and fruit. Sometimes he returned with nothing but bruises and hunger. Sometimes he returned with scraps barely enough to eat. Yet more than once he found food already waiting near his camp. Pieces of meat torn from prey too large for him to face, left in silence with no trace of giver. Yet he knew the truth. The predator had left it there not as mercy, but as test. Would he accept the gift or reject it? Would he eat and live or refuse and die? Each choice weighed against the bond forming between them. The first time he took the food his hand shook with shame. He felt weak, yet hunger was stronger and he ate. When he lifted his head the predator stood in the trees watching, its eyes burning not with anger, but with quiet fire. It did not attack. It only turned away. The second time he did not hesitate. He ate again, and when he raised his eyes the predator came closer than before. The bond grew not in words, but in silent exchange of action and need. Days bled into nights, and the pattern repeated. The predator gave not often but enough, and the man gave something back though he did not know it at first. He gave his courage, his calm, his refusal to bend, and in return the predator drew nearer, no longer only a shadow but almost a guardian. When lesser beasts came it roared them away. When storms raged it stood nearby, like a mountain against the wind. When silence grew heavy it broke it with a growl low and steady, not of warning but of presence. The man was not alone, and that truth burned stronger than fire. One night the man lit his fire small and careful. He sat with knife on his lap, The predator stepped from the shadows and did not stop at the edge. It came into the circle of light, its hide gleaming, its claws cutting lines into the soil. It lowered itself to the ground across from him, the fire between them. Two hunters, two survivors, two lives bound by judgment and choice. The man did not move, did not flinch, did not raise his weapon. He only watched, and in that silence respect was born. The predator let out a sound, not word but not simple growl either, a sound heavy with meaning. The human felt it in his bones. It was not threat and not warning. It was something older, something closer to recognition. He whispered back, though he knew the beast did not know his tongue. Yet he whispered anyway. A thank you not for the food or the protection, but for the bond. And for a moment the firelight caught in the predator's eyes like stars trapped in amber. From that night on the jungle shifted, not against him but around him. The man moved through it with steps more sure, the predator at times behind him, at times before him, but always near. The animals that once hunted him now gave way. The silence that once crushed him now carried weight of companionship. Even the nights when he slept were no longer filled with fear, but with strange calm, because death itself lay near and yet spared him, respected him, perhaps even trusted him. He began to learn the ways of the jungle from the beast, though no lesson was spoken. When it paused, he paused. When it avoided certain trees, he did the same. When it drank from certain streams, he followed. Soon he saw patterns he had never seen, dangers he had never known, paths hidden from weaker eyes. It was as if the predator was teacher and he was student, the bond shaping him not only in courage but in wisdom of survival. Rumor spread further now, across villages of alien tribes and wandering traders. They spoke of the man who walked with death. They spoke of Uncle Death, no longer only a name given by beast, but a name whispered by many. Some feared it, some mocked it, but some respected it. For if the predator that ruled the jungle gave bond to a human, then what did that mean for all others? What did it mean for the place of humankind among stars, filled with beasts and empires? The human did not hear their voices, yet he felt the weight of their truth. He was no longer only man surviving in strange world. He was becoming part of a story not only his but theirs, a story written in the bond between predator and prey that refused to remain prey. Every step he took now carried more than his life. It carried the meaning of his people, and the predator seemed to know, its gaze heavy not only with personal judgment, but with something larger. One evening he followed the predator deeper than before, into thickets thick as walls and caves dark as night, his knife ready but his heart steady. The beast led without turning, trusting that he would follow, trusting that he would not falter, and he did not. He followed until the air grew heavy with smell of stone and earth, until he felt that something more than test was near, something greater, something that would seal the bond forever. The predator stopped before a wall of roots, and with one strike of claw tore them aside. Behind lay a narrow path leading into blackness. The beast turned its head, amber eyes sharp like fire. It did not growl. It did not roar. It only waited. The choice was his, to step into the unknown or to turn away, to accept the bond fully or to break it. His heart beat heavy. His hand shook around the knife, but his feet moved forward. He entered the path, and the predator followed behind. Inside the cave the air was warm and strange. The walls glowed faint with fungus like stars painted on stone. The path opened into a chamber, and the man froze, for in the shadows small eyes glowed back at him. Not one pair but many. Small shapes moved with soft cries. Young predators, cubs with teeth not yet sharp and claws not yet strong. They circled their mother and stared at him with wonder and fear. The predator stepped beside him and lowered its head toward the cubs. Its gaze then turned to him, heavy with silent meaning. The man understood in his chest, though no word was spoken. This was the heart of the bond. Not food, not trial, not test, but trust. The predator had brought him here not to kill, not to scare, but to reveal, to ask, to offer. It had shown him its young, its blood, its future, and it asked him without words, "Will you protect? Will you guard? Will you be more than survivor?" The man trembled, yet he did not turn away. He knelt, his knife laid on the stone before him, his hands open, and one cub crept forward to sniff his fingers. The bond of respect became bond of kin. The cave grew darker as the man walked deeper behind the predator. The walls were damp with water and alive with faint glowing moss that painted the path with pale green light. His steps echoed against stone, and his heart beat heavy. He knew he had crossed into a place where no outsider had walked before. The predator moved without sound, its great body slipping through the narrow space like shadow given form. The man followed with knife at his side, but his hand did not lift, for this was not a place for weapons. This was a place for trust. The sound of soft cries filled the chamber ahead. The man froze at first, thinking of danger, but the cries were not harsh or wild. They were small and weak, the sound of life just beginning. His eyes widened as the glow revealed small shapes moving near the wall. Predator cubs with fur rough and eyes bright yet unknowing. They stumbled and climbed over one another, their teeth still tiny, their claws still blunt, their gaze filled not with hate, but with wonder. The predator lowered its head and let out a sound deep and low, a call that made the cubs rush forward. They surrounded their parent with cries that echoed across the cave. The man stood still as stone, his breath tight in his chest. He understood at once what had been asked of him. He was not only judged by his courage, he was now judged by his heart. The predator turned its burning eyes on him, and then looked toward the cubs. The meaning was clear. Will you stand for them? Will you guard what is mine? Will you show that your strength is not only in survival, but in care? The man felt his hands tremble as he slowly knelt on the stone. He laid his knife on the ground before him to show he meant no harm. He opened his palms to the small creatures. The cubs sniffed the air, their cries softer now. One crept forward with steps unsteady. Its small nose touched the man's hand. He felt its warmth against his skin. It climbed onto his lap without fear, its tiny claws scratching lightly. The others watched, then followed. Soon his lap and arms were filled with soft fur and playful cries. His heart that had known only fear and struggle now knew something else. It knew trust given by innocence. It knew respect that came not from strength, but from kindness. The predator growled low, not in warning, but in approval, its eyes softer now, though still sharp as fire. From that moment the bond deepened beyond the reach of words. The predator had shown him its most guarded secret, its hidden nest, its children, its future, and had allowed him near. No other being in the galaxy could claim such a gift. No other being had been called Uncle Death, and then asked to protect life so fragile. The man felt the weight of the name grow heavier yet brighter. He was not only survivor now, he was guardian. He was chosen. Days turned into nights within the hidden nest. The man learned to gather food, not only for himself, but for the cubs. He carried small prey. He gathered fruit. He found water in hidden streams. The cubs began to climb over him as if he were their kin. They chewed his sleeves and pulled at his hair. They curled beside him when he slept, their warmth keeping the cold away. The predator watched always, its gaze never leaving, but no longer with suspicion, now with something closer to faith, as if it believed the man would not betray what had been given to him. The jungle outside did not rest. Danger still roamed in shadows. Storms still shook the trees. But now when the man walked, he no longer walked alone. The cubs sometimes followed at a distance, their cries echoing. The predator walked with him closer than ever before. When threats came, it stood beside him, not as hunter, but as ally. Together they drove back beasts that would have torn him apart. Together they stood as family forged by fire and trust, and word of this spread across the stars like wind through branches. Travelers who dared near the jungle spoke of the sight, a man walking with death itself at his side, cubs at his feet, fire in his eyes. They whispered louder of Uncle Death. Some feared him as curse, some admired him as legend, some wondered if humanity itself had gained the favor of monsters. But all agreed that no tale like this had ever been told before, for the predator was not known to share, not known to trust, not known to give, yet it had given its children into human hands. One night, under a sky filled with silver stars, the man sat at the edge of the nest with cubs asleep around him. He looked upward and felt the vastness of the universe press upon him. He thought of his people far away. He thought of their struggles and their strength. He whispered that perhaps this bond was not only his but theirs. Perhaps the predator had seen in him the spirit of all humankind, the will to survive, the will to protect, the will to stand even when weak. And perhaps that was Wyatt had chosen him. Perhaps that was why it had named him Uncle Death. The predator stepped close and lowered its head near his shoulder. The two sat in silence, their breath steady, the fire low, the cub safe. It was not friendship in simple sense. It was not alliance in simple terms. It was something deeper, something ancient, the recognition of equals born in different forms, the predator and the human, the death bringer and the survivor, now joined as protectors of life too young to stand alone. And in that silence they shared respect that no empire could shatter. But peace never lasts long in wild worlds. One dawn the man woke to cries sharp and fearful. He rushed from the nest to see smoke rising from the trees. Alien hunters had come, their weapons bright with metal, their eyes hungry for trophies. They had tracked the predator. They had found the nest. The man felt fire in his chest. He knew this was the true test. Not hunger, not storm, not beast, but choice. Would he flee and live, or would he fight and protect what was not his but had been given to him? He did not hesitate. He gripped his knife and stood before the path, his body weak, but his spirit iron. The predator appeared behind him, its growl shaking the ground. The cubs cried within the cave. The hunters stepped forward with laughter cruel and sharp. They spoke of pelts and bones and riches. They raised their weapons, ready to strike. The man stepped forward, not backward. He spread his arms wide, as if his body alone could shield the nest. The hunters laughed louder, yet they did not see the truth. The bond forged in storm and silence now burned brighter than any weapon. The predator roared and the jungle shook, but still the man did not step aside. He stood as wall of flesh between killers and the young. The hunters fired and the air split with heat. The man fell to his knees with pain sharp as flame, but he rose again with knife in hand, his blood on the soil, his eyes fierce. He struck not with strength of muscle, but with cunning of will. He led them into traps he had built from vines and roots. He cut their lines. He broke their aim. He moved with the predator as if they shared one mind. Each step he took, each breath he gave was for the cubs, for the trust given to him, for the bond that had made him more than survivor, more than human, more than prey. The man awoke with pain burning across his body, yet he still breathed. The wounds left by the hunters ached like fire, but his spirit did not bend. He opened his eyes to see the cubs curled against him, their small bodies warm and alive. The predator stood near with eyes glowing in the dim light of dawn. It did not leave his side through the night. It had guarded him as he had guarded its young, and in that moment the bond between them grew into something beyond judgment, something beyond trial. It became trust. The jungle was quiet after the battle. The hunters had fled, leaving behind broken weapons and shattered pride. The ground carried the smell of blood and smoke, but it also carried the scent of victory. The man sat up slowly with his knife still in hand, though he was too weak to lift it in defense. The predator lowered its great head close and brushed its scarred muzzle against his shoulder. The gesture was not of command but of respect, as if it now saw him not as test subject, not as prey, not even only as guardian, but as part of itself, as kin. Days passed as the man healed. The predator brought him food more often now, not scraps thrown aside but pieces shared with care. The cubs grew stronger and began to follow him when he walked short paths outside the cave. They tumbled over one another with playful cries. They chewed at his sleeves and nipped at his fingers with teeth not yet sharp. Their laughter filled the air and washed away the silence that once ruled the jungle. And every time he looked upon them, he felt the truth heavier. He was trusted. He was needed. He was chosen to stand not only for himself, but for them. He learned to weave shelters from vines for the cubs when storms raged. He learned to carve small traps to catch food. He learned to listen to the predator's movements and read its silent lessons. Together they cared for the young. Together they fought against the dangers that circled the jungle. Every day his bond with the beast grew deeper. Every day the trust was given more fully, until the man no longer thought of himself as guest in the jungle, but as part of it, as part of a family that fate itself had woven. Aliens from beyond the jungle began to whisper louder. Travelers spoke of the man who now lived among predators as brother and guardian. They spoke of Uncle Death, not only as survivor, but as protector of the most feared hunters in the galaxy. Some called him mad. Some called him blessed. Some called him dangerous. Yet all agreed that a story like his had never been heard. A human trusted by death itself. A human named kin by the beast that ruled the shadows. One evening as the sun fell red across the trees, the predator brought him to a place he had not seen before. A high cliff that looked over endless jungle. The sky burned with light, and the wind carried scents of earth and storm. The predator stood tall beside him, and the cubs played near their feet. The man felt his chest heavy with wonder, for in that view he saw not only land but destiny. He understood that the predator had brought him here to see the world, not a stranger, but his home. To see the future that he was now bound to guard. The cubs ran in circles chasing the fading light, and the predator let out a low growl that rolled across the valley like thunder. It was not a growl of warning. It was a growl of pride. The man whispered into the wind that he would never abandon this trust. He would never betray the bond. He would guard the cubs as if they were his own blood. He would stand beside the predator until the stars themselves grew dark. The predator turned its head and locked eyes with him. The silence spoke louder than words. It believed him. It accepted his vow. The trust was sealed not by ritual or mark, but by life itself. The predator had given him the heart of its line, and he had sworn to protect it with every breath. Weeks passed, and the cubs grew taller, their steps stronger, their teeth sharper. Yet still they climbed over him with joy and followed him with laughter. They learned from him as much as they learned from their parent. How to move through water quietly. How to listen for danger in the wind. How to share food and not fight over it. Small lessons of care and unity. The predator watched with silent eyes, as if it too learned something from the human, as if it too saw value beyond strength alone. Respect had grown into kinship, and kinship into trust. But the jungle did not forgive peace for long. One night cries rose from the edge of the trees. Creatures with hides hard as stone and fangs dripping venom came in a pack, drawn by the scent of young life. The cubs cried in fear, and the man stood with knife in hand, though he knew the beasts were too many. The predator roared and leapt into the fray, its claws tearing through flesh. But even it could not fight all at once. The man moved with fury, setting fire to branches, driving smoke into the beasts, his mind sharp with cunning, his heart fierce with will. Together with the predator, they drove the monsters back, the cubs safe again, their trust in him unshaken. When the battle ended, the man collapsed with exhaustion, his chest heaving, his knife broken. Yet the cubs climbed over him with joyful cries, licking his wounds, curling beside him with warmth. The predator watched and lowered itself to the ground beside him, not as master, not as judge, but as equal. The bond of trust now proven beyond doubt. The man had risked his life again, not out of fear, but out of love for the young. And the predator understood. It growled low and soft like thunder turned. Gentle, a sound only family would ever hear. From then on, the jungle itself seemed to bend around them. Paths opened, storms parted, beasts gave way, as if the world recognized the bond and the trust within it, as if even the earth and sky accepted the man as Uncle Death, not in name of doom, but in name of life. The cubs grew faster, stronger, but still they sought him, still they trusted him, still they looked to him as guardian. The predator allowed it without question, without doubt, because the trust had been given and it would never be taken back. One night under a full moon, the man sat by the fire, with cubs asleep around him. The predator lay nearby, silent and watchful, the jungle alive with soft sounds. He thought of his people again far across the stars. He thought of how they fought their own battles for survival. He thought that perhaps this bond was not only his, but a message, a truth that humanity itself carried, that even in the face of death, they could earn respect, they could earn trust, they could become family with even the darkest of beings. He whispered into the night that he would carry this truth wherever fate led him, and the predator opened its eyes and growled soft in answer, as if it agreed. The cubs stirred and pressed close against him, their small breath steady and warm. He smiled weakly, tired yet filled with strength. He knew the path ahead would not be easy. He knew hunters would return. He knew danger would always circle. Yet he also knew the bond of trust was stronger than any blade, stronger than any storm, stronger than death itself. He would guard the cubs. He would walk beside the predator. He would honor the name given to him, not as curse, but as vow. He would be uncle, death, protector, guardian, family, until his last breath. The jungle air was heavy with silence, the kind of silence that comes before great storms. The man felt it in his bones as he walked with the cubs at his side and the predator close behind. The world that had grown into home now whispered with unease. Birds no longer sang. Trees no longer swayed. Even the river seemed to hold their breath. He looked at the predator and saw its amber eyes narrow. It too felt what was coming. Danger greater than storm or beast. Danger that would test not only bond but destiny. The cubs were strong now, their teeth sharp, their claws ready. Yet they were still young, still needing guidance and protection. The man trained them each day, teaching them patience, teaching them to move quietly, teaching them to listen before striking. He showed them how to read the wind and how to find water in hidden streams. They trusted him with every lesson. They trusted him as much as they trusted their parent, and he knew that this trust would soon face fire. One evening the horizon burned with light, not the light of sun but of flame. Smoke rose thick and cruel. The jungle stirred with panic as creatures fled. The man climbed a ridge and saw shapes moving through the fire. Alien hunters, more than before, armed with weapons bright and sharp, their eyes hungry for glory and profit. They came not as small band but as army. They came to end the predator. They came to claim the cubs, and perhaps to take him as trophy too. His blood grew cold, but his heart grew fierce. This was the crisis he had felt in the silence, the moment that would decide if trust could survive. The predator roared into the night, a roar that shook the ground and sent fear through the trees. The cubs cried in answer. The man stood with knife in hand, though he knew it was small against the storm approaching. Yet he did not falter. He did not step back. He whispered to the cubs that they would live. He promised them safety. He promised them life. And though he was only man, he believed his vow, because he had no choice but to believe. For without belief there was only death. The hunters entered the jungle with fire and steel, cutting down trees, scattering beasts, their laughter cruel, their voices filled with greed. They spoke of skins and bones and riches. They spoke of glory and conquest. They spoke of killing the predator and breaking the legend of Uncle Death. The man heard their words and felt rage burn inside him. He was no longer only survivor, no longer only guest in this land. He was protector now. He was family, and no hunter would touch what had been given to him, not while he still drew breath. Night fell heavy, and the battle began. The predator leapt from the shadows with claws tearing through metal, its roar thunder, its strength fire. The hunters screamed as their weapons split in half. Yet they were many, more than even the beast could slay in one strike. The man moved with cunning, using traps of vine and pit, using smoke to blind. He struck where they were weak. His knife cut not with muscle but with thought. Every move made not to kill for glory but to protect the cubs, to guard the trust. The cubs themselves fought too, though still young. They bit and clawed. They stood beside their parent and their human guardian. Together they formed circle of defiance, circle of family. The hunters pressed harder with fire that scorched the ground, with spears that cut the air. The man bled from wounds sharp and deep, his breath ragged. Yet still he stood, still he moved, still he fought, because to fall was to break the bond. To fall was to betray the trust, and betrayal was worse than death. The jungle burned with chaos, trees falling, rivers steaming, sky black with smoke. Yet through it all the man and predator stood side by side, moving as one, as if years of silence and trial had forged them into single spirit. The predator shielded him from death more than once, and he shielded the cubs from death more than once, each saving the other, each proving that trust was stronger than fear, stronger than fire, stronger than death itself. The hunters began to falter, their voices less cruel now, their steps less sure. They had expected easy victory. They had expected prey. But what they found was legend made flesh. What they found was Uncle Death standing unbroken with the deadliest beast of the stars. They began to fear the bond they could not understand. For no weapon can break what is not bound by fear, but by love. And no army can crush what is not chained by weakness, but by honor. Yet the battle was not over. One hunter greater than the rest stepped forward, clad in armor black as night, weapon bright as star, his eyes crueler than fire. He laughed at the sight of man and beast standing together. He called it mockery. He called it madness. He called it weakness. He raised his blade to strike down the cubs. The man leapt in front without thought, his knife broken, his body weak, yet his will sharp as steel. The blow struck him down. Pain ripped through his chest, blood poured like river. The cubs cried out, and the predator roared with rage that shook the heavens. The predator struck with fury unseen before, claws breaking armor, fangs crushing steel. The great hunter fell broken, his weapon shattered, his army scattered in terror. The predator stood over the man with eyes fierce and sorrowful. Its roar turned into cry not of rage but of mourning, a sound the jungle had never heard, a sound of grief. It lowered its head and pressed against the human's chest, feeling the weak beat of his heart. He was not gone, not yet, his breath shallow, his eyes faint, but still alive, still holding on because he had sworn vow to protect, and his vow was not yet complete. The cubs climbed over him crying, licking his wounds, their small bodies trembling. The man whispered weak into the night that they must live, that they must grow, that they must remember the trust. He told them he was Uncle Death, not to bring end but to guard beginning. His words soft yet filled with strength. The predator growled low in answer, a vow of its own, a vow that his sacrifice would not be in vain, that his bond would not be forgotten, that his trust would live in the cubs forever. The hunters fled into the smoke, their courage broken, their voices lost. The jungle fell silent again except for the crack of fire dying. The man lay weak but alive. The predator lay beside him guarding. The cubs pressed close. The bond unshaken though tested by fire and blood. He had stood against death itself and had not betrayed the trust. He had kept his vow. And though his body was broken, his spirit was stronger than ever. As dawn rose over the ashes, the jungle seemed to bow in silence. Birds returned. Wind moved again. Rivers flowed free. The world had seen the crisis, and the world had witnessed the bond endure. The predator raised its head to the sky and let out cry of triumph and sorrow mixed as one. A cry that told all who heard that Uncle Death was no longer only name. It was truth. It was vow. It was legend. And no fire, no blade, no fear could take it away. The dawn after the battle rose heavy with ash. The jungle that once sang with life now stood scarred and blackened. The man lay weak upon the earth with blood marking his skin and pain burning through his chest. Yet his eyes still opened and his heart still beat. The cubs circled him, with cries sharp and worried, pressing their small bodies close as if their warmth could keep his spirit from fading. The predator stood tall above him, its eyes fierce with sorrow and pride. It had fought with all its strength, but it knew the truth. Without the man, the cubs would not have survived. Without him, the bond would not have been sealed. For many days the man drifted between sleep and waking, sometimes lost in shadow, sometimes lifted by faint whispers of the cubs. He felt their tiny claws on his hands, their breath against his face. He felt the predator near, always near, guarding not only his body but his soul. He knew he should have fallen, yet he did not, because the vow he had made burned brighter than death. He had sworn to guard them, and so long as they breathed, he would not leave. His body was broken, yet his spirit refused to fall. His name had become his strength, Uncle Death, not curse but promise. The jungle healed around them. New shoots rose from the ash. Rivers carved new paths through scorched earth. Beasts returned to the trees, though cautious. The cubs grew stronger each day, their play more fierce, their eyes sharper, their roars louder. And the man, though scarred, began to rise again, his steps slow at first, his breath heavy. Yet each day he stood longer. Each day he walked farther. He carried his wounds like marks of honor, proof of what he had faced and endured, proof that trust was not broken, proof that the bond had survived fire and blood. Aliens from far tribes came to the edges of the jungle to see. They whispered of the sight, the human walking among predators with cubs at his side and the great beast beside him. They whispered of Uncle Death, no longer a story told in shadow, but a truth standing in flesh. Some bowed in respect, some fled in fear, but all spread the word across stars. They spoke of how the deadliest hunter of the galaxy had chosen a human as kin, how it had given its children into his care, how it had named him Uncle Death, and the story spread like fire in dry grass. In time, traders and wanderers carried the legend to distant worlds. They told of the bond that no weapon could break, of the man who stood against armies for cubs not of his blood, of the predator who roared not in rage but in honor. Some laughed and called it lie. Some feared it and called it omen. Yet many listened and felt respect stir in their hearts. For if the strongest beast of the stars could give trust to a human, then what might humankind be in the days to come? What might they become? In the eyes of the galaxy, the man did not seek such fame. He cared only for the cubs and the bond. He spent his days teaching them more, showing them how to track, how to guard, how to hunt with wisdom, not only with strength. He taught them patience and care. He showed them how to protect each other. The predator watched and learned as well. For though it was master of the hunt, it had never known the softer lessons the human carried. It had never known that strength was not only in claw and tooth, but in unity and trust. Together they raised the cubs. Together they forged a family that was more than blood. The cubs grew larger with each season, their roars louder, their steps heavier. Yet even as they grew, they never forgot the man who had shielded them. They still pressed against him at night. They still followed him with joy. They still trusted him with every breath. And he in turn carried them in his heart as his own. He whispered to them stories of humanity, of his people who fought not because they were strong, but because they would never stop. He told them that one day they would walk not only in jungle but among stars, and they would carry the bond with them wherever they went. One night beneath a sky filled with countless stars, the predator raised its head and let out a cry, not of mourning, not of rage, but of triumph. The sound rolled through the jungle and far beyond. The cubs answered with smaller roars, and the man stood beside them whispering into the wind, "This is family. This is vow. This is truth." The legend was no longer story whispered by strangers. It was song sung by stars themselves. The bond of Uncle Death and the predator family became part of the world, part of the galaxy, part of history. Time passed and more hunters came, some seeking glory, some seeking to test the legend. Yet none succeeded. For every time they entered the jungle, they found not prey, but family united. The predator fierce, the cub strong, and the man unyielding. They fought together with one mind, one heart. And the hunters fled broken. The legend only grew. The name Uncle Death carried fear into hearts of enemies and respect into hearts of allies. It became symbol, not of doom but of bond, not of curse but of strength. The man grew older, his scars deep, his hair touched by gray. Yet still he walked strong. Still he taught the cubs now grown. Still he sat by the fire with Predator at his side. He thought often of his people across the stars. He thought that one day the story would reach them too, that they would hear of the trust he had earned, the bond he had made, and they would know that humanity was not weak, that humanity could stand even before death and be named kin. He hoped they would take strength from his story. He hoped they would carry the lesson into every corner of the galaxy. The predator, too, grew older, its hide more scarred, its roars deeper, yet still its eyes burned with fire. It looked upon the man not as stranger, but as brother, not as prey, but as equal. And when it walked with him, through the jungle creatures bowed in silence, for they knew they walked in presence of something greater than beast and greater than man. They walked in presence of bond, the predator and Uncle Death together, guardians of life and guardians of trust. When the cubs at last reached their full strength, they stood taller than the man, their teeth sharp, their roars shaking the trees. Yet they still pressed their heads against him with love. They still sat beside him at fire. They still called him guardian, though no word was spoken. And when they went into the wild to claim their own paths, they carried his lessons in their hearts. They carried his trust in their blood. And wherever they roared, the galaxy whispered that Uncle Death had given them strength. And so the story lived on, passed from mouth to mouth, from world to world. The story of how the predator named him Uncle Death, but entrusted its children to him. The story of how he fought not for glory, but for family. The story of how trust between man and beast changed, not only lives, but legend. In taverns, aliens spoke of it with awe. In councils, they debated its meaning. In villages, they told it to children as lesson of courage and honor. And even in places where humans were seen as weak, they spoke his name with respect.